Good morning and welcome to this webinar all about marketing automation and Google Analytics, looking at how to make things work a little bit better online without having to work harder. This session is a joint webinar delivered by Footprint Digital and Wired Plus. We have Chris from Footprint who'll be looking at Google Analytics, but first things first, looking at marketing automation. Amy will run through that. Now, we will have time at the end for questions, so do please put them in. You have the chat on the side of the YouTube stream. We'll be getting through as many questions as we can get through at the end, so do fire them in there, and we've had a few that have been sent through by email already as well. So keep them coming in. We'll cover those later on, and over to Amy at Wired to look at marketing automation.
Hi everyone, good morning. Thanks for joining us today. So we'll get started then, shall we? So just to quickly introduce myself and explain a bit about Wired and who we are. As I say, my name's Amy and I'm Head of Client Services at Wired. And Wired Plus is a UK-based marketing automation platform. So we provide the tools to allow our clients to make better marketing decisions. And fundamentally, that comes down to automating messages, sending the right message at the right time to help you get the best from your marketing. So today, as Thomas said, we'll be heading straight into a bit more about marketing automation, how it can help businesses like yours, what are the key benefits, some examples, and then how it links together with your analytics. And then we'll lead on to Chris. So if we get started first of all then, what is marketing automation? It's one of those words, I'm sure you've heard it. It is a huge phrase that encompasses a huge amount of description, different tools, different functionality, but what is it and where do we start? So in a nutshell, it's a tool that's going to automate and measure your marketing tasks. If you've had a bit of a dip into marketing automation, you'll know there's a lot more to it than just that, which we'll dig into as well. But we get a huge amount of response and engagement from automated messages. So there's a huge amount of potential for companies if you're not doing it at the moment. So just a few stats on screen. 75% of businesses say that they are using automation. So still a nice percentage of companies that aren't. 60% of automation users feel a benefit is improved customer experience, and I would definitely agree with that in my experience. And then 59% of automation users identify better quality leads, which definitely makes sense if we're sending the right message at the right time. So normally, when you think of automation, you might think of email marketing or different types of messages sent via email, which I suppose is where a lot of marketing automation starts and where a lot of people start with it when they're venturing out into the world of automation. So what is the difference between the two? So traditionally, many people will use email marketing as a way to sell to their audience or to get messages out there or to communicate different things. And a lot of people use this kind of one-to-one or this batch and blast kind of approach, which means that if you look at the graph on the screen here, if you run that kind of common shotgun approach at the bottom of the graph there, you'll see quite a low conversion rate. But if we can start to introduce things like demographic data, behavioural data, and we start to interact with our audience on a more one-to-one level, then we'll see our conversion rate increase. So not only are we helping our customers with their problems and providing solutions, but we're also getting a better conversion rate as well. So win-win for both parties. So as I mentioned, it traditionally encompasses email, but there are loads of other different tools and functionality that can be combined with that as part of your automation cycle. So unlike other different providers where you might just be focused on email, if you're not running any automation at the moment, you might want to look at a provider that gives you all of these different tools. So it's things like tracking the website visitors and again through analytics, different landing pages, gathering data through forms or surveys or integrating your system. that's going to lead you on to then segmenting your data and applying lead scores, and all of these different tools and functionality you want to combine into one easy to understand piece of information so that you know more about your customer. And the more you know, the better you can then target, the better your conversion rate will be. So it all comes back down to pushing towards that interaction approach and increasing the conversion rate. Now, how does it actually work? So it's all well and good saying, yeah, just do automation, just start sending out some targeted messages, but how do we start that process? So the first step of automating anything is to create a workflow. And even before you get to this point, you want to think about the different types of targeting that you can introduce for the company. So it might be that you have a gap where in your marketing funnel when new contacts subscribe. So let's say you get a bunch of new leads from wherever that may be, different marketing channels, but you're not welcoming them, you're not introducing them to the company, and off they go to the sales team and that's it. But what we want to do through automation is introduce them to the company, and we can send them a welcome email. But that all starts with an enrollment rule. So you always have to think of automation in terms of logic and rules, which again can be quite, I guess, daunting if you haven't done it before. But it's just thinking about if you were a customer, or I guess we all are, customers and consumers, what would we want to receive from a company? So let's say we signed up to a newsletter. It would be quite nice to get a bit of a thank you and a welcome. So we've got a bit of a flow chart on the right here where we can then send a welcome campaign. And then we can start to become more targeted. So we could add a delay in there. We could have a look at the behavior on the campaign. We can have a look if the contact is opening or clicking. If they are doing either of those things, we could then send them an appropriate follow-up message. Again, just to keep that engagement really high as the customer is now interested in your company. So it all starts with that first enrollment rule. Now, if you're still not sure about if automation is relevant for your company or right for what you need, there are a couple of questions on screen here which may make you think. So if you are answering no to any of these questions on the side of the screen here, this may be a sign that you need automation. One of the more common things we hear from our customers is that, oh, I didn't realize that automation could handle so much. I didn't realize it could do even basic admin tasks can be taken care of for you. But most of the time, our clients will introduce automation as a way to nurture and target their customers with the right message at the right time. So if you're thinking about identifying and tracking your customers and prospects, automation can definitely help with that. Prioritizing leads, looking at the data in one place, filtering leads based on engagement and behavior, all that can be done through automation. And again, if you're thinking that this might seem quite daunting and a huge task to even get to this point, I would say start small and start looking at how you could automate any kind of basic processes that you're doing at the moment. So whether that's something like you send a weekly email to your prospects and to your clients, is there any process that as part of that you could automate? Whether that's uploading data, the sending of the email, the pulling of the reports. It's just looking at a smaller level, and then you can expand out to answer some of these bigger questions that you might have. So that leads us then onto the benefits. So we know what automation is. We know what it's kind of made up of and how it might slot into our business, but why would we go to all that bother to introduce a targeted message? So there are 8 key benefits. The main one I would say is to reduce costs. Now this could be in the form of staffing levels, time spent on projects, time spent on sending out emails. The more emails you send a lot of the time with different providers as well, tend to get a reduction on the contract as well. So that could help with costs too. It's going to align the marketing and sales teams. So If all of your teams know that certain emails get sent out at a certain time of day, a certain week, in a certain order, then everyone's on the same page. Everyone knows what to expect. So it can help drive those teams together as well if previously there has been disparity there. It can increase your efficiencies. So across the whole board, in terms of one person sending out different emails, applying lead scores, updating a CRM, automation can handle all of that for you. In turn, that will then enhance the customer experience and therefore increase retention. So going back to that graph again, we are learning more about our audience, we're increasing the conversion rate. So if we're sending the right message at the right time to the right person, you'll know yourself as a consumer that that's really nice when you get a really nice targeted email, you get that thank you message after a purchase and it's targeted with the bits and pieces that you've bought. It's really nice and increases that brand loyalty. So we can do that for our customers as well. And I think a lot of the time people tend to think that that's only for B2C companies, but I would say it's not anymore. There isn't a big difference anymore in the way that B2C and B2B companies target their audiences. So definitely worth thinking about if there's any techniques you've seen as a consumer that you can introduce for your company. Next, it's going to help integrate your CRM and other systems. Now, this is a big one. Again, this can be hugely daunting, and a lot of the time we need some developers to help us with this. But if we could integrate our CRM and other different systems and platforms that we're using, we've then got more data at our fingertips, and we can start to introduce some of this more clever and complex automation. So we can then take it from that level of let's send out a welcome email through to a really targeted approach where we know exactly what we're saying to the right person. So again, if this is maybe a bit overwhelming thinking about integrating the systems, it might be worth just starting small and thinking about, could you integrate certain forms on the website with those different tools that you're using? Next, it's going to allow us to track our performance. So a lot of the time, well, a huge amount of the time in marketing, we're KPI driven. We want to track our performance down to the last person who's clicked and specifically when and where and what they did. So if we're automating our messages, it means that we're saving that huge amount of time in preparing and sending out the emails or the different types of campaigns that you might be sending. And that gives us more time to then analyze and optimize what it is that we're doing. And that, I think, as marketeers is where our skill set lies. We want to improve our results that we're getting. And if you're stuck in the humdrum of day-to-day building emails and sending them out and updating CRM, then you don't have the chance to get stuck into that optimization and performance side of things. Next, that is going to help us then create campaigns that resonate. So this kind of comes back to one of the ethos of Wired, I suppose, which is that to make better marketing decisions. So if we have all of our data in one place, we're tracking the performance, we're aligning the teams, we are going to therefore create campaigns that resonate with our audience. And again, thinking about our own experiences as consumers, if you've ever had a campaign that says, "Hi, John," and your name isn't John, it's infuriating. And you think, what are you doing as a company? So we don't want to do that to our customers as well. We want to do the complete opposite, where we know that that brand gets us. Ultimately, this all comes back down to making more money and increasing return on investment. If we keep our customers happy, we'll increase that ROI. If we keep our prospects happy, we'll increase that ROI as well. So fundamentally, we want to make more money and make more money cleverly. So leading into some examples of automation then. So these are just some kind of fundamentals that you might want to have a look at introducing if you haven't already. Even if you have them in place, any optimization you can make to those different workflows you have is definitely a good idea. So first up then, we've got a basic welcome email. So as I mentioned, this is a workflow that takes place when a contact is created inside CRM, inside a website, inside an ESP, and then sends a welcome email. Now, a lot of the time, you'll see, again, thinking about as a consumer, you might get a cheeky 10% off or a bit of an offer. So it's worth testing that if you haven't already. But I would say that consumers are quite savvy now and they know to expect a bit of a discount. So it might end up being a bit of a loss if people are doing it on purpose, but definitely worth a bit of a test anyway. So that's kind of a fundamental workflow that you can introduce. Next up, we have VIP customers. So this takes into account some of those other tools that we mentioned earlier on. So this is looking at things like your lead score and your segmentation of the data. So if you can pull together a group of your most targeted VIP customers, you could then target them more appropriately with certain offers or different types of campaigns. And this is quite interesting because you could make this strategy aware, or make your other contacts aware of this strategy, so that they might want to get in on the action and become a VIP customer themselves. So it's going to keep your contacts engaged, keep them feeling special and keep them spending, but then it also allows you to test different things with this audience, as they're going to be advocates for you, and you can nurture them with really specific campaigns as well. Next up, we have re-engagement. Again, this is one that I think a lot of companies overlook because it's not the most exciting workflow in the world, to be honest, but I do think it is something necessary. You might have heard this before referred to as a sunset policy or a re-engagement policy. So this is looking at inactive subscribers. So a lot of the time, like with that VIP campaign, we are targeting our top contacts. But what about people at the other end of the pile? We don't want to forget about them. There's still people on our list. They might have been old customers. They could have come from anywhere, but they're not engaging regularly with our campaigns. So what we want to do with the re-engagement strategy is target them and ask them whether they'd still like to remain on our list, which again can be quite scary for companies to get their head around, that they're going to get a high unsubscribe rate on a campaign. But personally, I think it's better to have a small and engaged list than a huge list that doesn't engage at all, as they're just going to dilute your stats in the long run and they're not going to buy. So if you can segment out those two groups of contacts based on engagement or non-engagement, you can then send a campaign, kind of like the one you can see on the screen, which is from Not on the High Street, which is saying, hello stranger, here's 10% off. And then it directly promotes the unsubscribe. So if you're willing to do that, what you'll see then is a higher engagement on your campaigns in the future, because you're only targeting people who want to hear from you. So definitely worth maybe just a quick segment inside your CRM or inside your ESP to see how many unengaged contacts you have, and that unengagement or non-engagement is going to look different for every company. It might be opens, it might be clicks, it might be replies. It all depends on what that looks like to you. Next up then, we have cart abandonment. Again, more of an advanced technique, and a lot of the time thought about only for B2C companies. But if we think about cart abandonment, this is where a customer will leave an item in their shopping cart, they don't check out, and we can then target them with a message that says come back and complete your purchase. If you aren't a B2C company, you could apply this same logic to a browse abandonment process. So if you have a sign-up form or a survey that you want people to complete, you could then send them a browse abandonment message in the same kind of tone to say come back and finish where you left off. And these kind of campaigns can make a huge difference to the sales conversion figures. I think the average is around 6% uplift in sales. So it's a huge percentage of revenue that could be missed. So again, definitely worth thinking about whether that could be slotted in for your kind of company. And then our final example is survey and feedback emails. Again, something that's really simple, but not a lot of companies introduce. So this is where we could send a survey, a feedback, a review request after a purchase has been completed. And to be honest, I don't think it even needs to be after a purchase. It could be after a support ticket was resolved, a conversation had been had, a meeting had taken place. It's just getting that extra piece of insight and extra pieces of information from the customer that you can then use in future marketing. So thinking about making those better decisions, we can take some of the insight that we gather and actually lead our strategy with what we've learnt, and we can do that automatically through automation. So a recent example of this, just in our own experience here at Wired, was a company who sent out a survey. They sent a quarterly survey to their customers, and they had some really positive feedback about if the companies or the customers would recommend the business to future contacts. I think it was about a 90% positive feedback they'd had. So they could see it as a positive because, first of all, you've had 90% of your customers who said, yes, we definitely recommend you. But it also then gives you that 10% learnings as well. So if there are things that aren't right with your sales funnel, or aren't right with the processes that you have in place, we can fix that before anyone else goes through those processes. So again, it's one of those things where it's really easy to implement. It's just one email that sends automatically, fundamentally, but it's going to give you a huge amount of data back. So what that all encompasses is that we're using automation in this example to enrich our data. So if we can gather all of that information together, ranging from the different workflows that we have in place to the detailed granular information we receive on a campaign, even where in the world those customers are engaging with our messages, we can use all of that information to drive our strategy and be more clever with what we're doing and those different messages that we're sending. And it's one of those things where we can optimize it constantly. We don't just have to set up an automation workflow and leave it to run for 3 years and forget all about it. It can be easily adjusted. You can change things like subject lines, call to action buttons, the different campaigns that you're running, all the time thinking about how we can be better at our job, we can be better marketeers. Now, if that all sounds good to you and you want to get started, one of the things to think about is a platform that's going to let you combine all of that together. Now, you might have a platform that does a part of that and a different platform that does something else. But if you are wanting to connect everything together, I would suggest looking for a platform or a solution that has those integrations available. So it's things like pushing the data back to analytics, which we'll cover shortly, so that we can see a full view of our customers. And the more data we have, the better decisions we can make, obviously without being a bit overwhelmed with all that data in one place. But definitely worth thinking about how you can integrate with the wider business goals rather than just the marketing KPIs. So that kind of leads us on to analytics now. So if we can then combine our automation platform with analytics, we'll then get a full view of that engagement once the contact gets through to the website, for example. So if we think in terms of the automated messages that we're sending, we are automating that communication until they get onto the site, and at which point analytics will take over. So on that note, I'll hand over to Chris now to take over on the analytics side of things. If you have any questions about automation that I can help with, please pop a question in the chat and we'll get to the questions at the end. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you for that, Amy. That was really interesting. You know, analytics is, or the whole marketing automation piece is something that I'm a huge kind of fan of, being a bit of a kind of a self-confessed sort of data and tracking geek, which for all of you on the live stream, that means you're in a good place for the next part where we go into Google Analytics more specifically, and the importance of why we set it up, why it's critical, and why we often say this is one of the most overlooked sort of elements of a digital web strategy, which is a bit of a massive missed opportunity. So let's start off. Why Google Analytics? As we've seen, there are lots of platforms that you can use online, a lot of which that do this or things like this. We talk about Google Analytics quite heavily because, well, it's one of the most well-established platforms in this space. The setup is relatively easy and straightforward. Obviously, it's easy for us to say that because we do it all the time, but I can assure you there are far more tougher ones to get your head around. The community for Google Analytics is really quite something, actually. There are a pocket of very kind of passionate people that work in this space that do help, that are very generous with their time, and it's kind of constantly getting supported, which has built what is a really rich and comprehensive tracking tool set that there are only a small amount of cases where analytics cannot do what's needed. And if you're worried about those cases, then you have some very particular requirements indeed. Being a Google piece of software has direct integration with other Google services, so Google Ads and Search Console being the main ones, but their kind of suite of integrations is getting far greater. And actually, one of the biggest reasons we like it is it's free, which, you know, pretty strong reason to kind of get it installed and give it a go. Right, so when we talk about analytics, we talk about, well, the first thing you have to do is install it and set it up. This is probably the most techy part of the process. Usually there's a piece of code that you send to your web developer to drop on your website, and that's it. That's in the kind of the most basic sense of the word. The particular version on the screen is one version. There are 4 or 5 different types of analytics codes you can install, but once you set up a free account, Google will give you the most up-to-date version. That's what you instruct your developer to work with. Now, if you're working with sort of one of the more common CMS platforms, or WordPress or Magento, or a lot of the open source ones out there, you will have Google Analytics sort of plugins or extensions that you can install yourself. You drop in your tracking ID and then off you go. So you can even get what we'd call kind of no code or no dev installation routes and methods for that. Now, this code sends the data directly to Google, where it's then processed and then presented through Google Analytics interface. There's quite a startling amount of data that actually is picked up, you know, from down to your screen size, your location, your language, where you've come from. We'll talk about a few more of these in a minute, but let's not underestimate the computational power that it takes on Google's side to make sense of all of this information. And, you know, this platform does it from the word go, so you don't have to worry about that. But the key point to this is how it connects us to the site performance and actually how things are going. So when we like to think about Google Analytics and how to kind of start that journey, we look at Albert Einstein and his quote, "Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted." And there's a couple of ways you can kind of take that, but tracking provides data, and data now allows analysis. If you're not capturing this information, you cannot use it. Now, there's far too much data perhaps in analytics for you to really get your head around and use usefully, but there is critical business information that you can take out of it. Broadly speaking, we look at what traffic your website receives, so who's coming. You'll be amazed the amount of people that actually can't answer that question. Who the audience is. Analytics does give some relatively advanced demographic data and insight if you've enabled those settings, so that can be incredibly illuminating. Now, where they came from, so geographically, but when we talk about different marketing campaigns and sources, it can tell us, well, where did they come from? From your marketing automation channels, for example, would be quite an obvious link based on the webinar, and when they arrived, and then what they did when they arrived. So you can look at time of day, day of week, month of year. You can sort of work out, okay, when is the website most popular? And the crucial part, what did they do? Did they purchase? Did they send a contact form? There are lots of kind of pertinent questions that will steer your online strategy, and you need to use this information to ensure you are going in the right direction. Irrespective of your marketing channels and what it is you're doing, if you're not being informed by the data, you're going to struggle. So there is so much data, as I said before. It's very possible that you can get kind of quite blinded by this. So we really need to focus on the important bits. And that's not just to save your sanity, but that saves your time, and it will ultimately make you more effective. Now, the analysis of the data needs context to turn it into actionable insights, because none of these data points that you can see within Google Analytics make sense necessarily by themselves. But the ultimate objective is to tie the data that analytics is presenting you to your actual business objectives. Now, the most obvious ones being, sales, if you're in an e-commerce environment, or if you're B2B or service-led, could be contacts, could be inquiries, could be interest. There are many different types of objectives, but analytics can track these, and it helps businesses focus on what is important, what things are working, what things aren't. And then ultimately, where do you spend your precious time, energy, and money? Because that's a question that everybody we speak to has. Now, some of the specific answers that can help a business are that analytics can facilitate. You can look at, who are your target audience, relatively sort of straightforward there. You can look at marketing campaigns more specifically and look at the performance of each individual one. So if you are investing in paid search, if you're investing in email marketing, in organic or SEO, you can actually pinpoint which of these particular campaigns is actually driving the most revenue or key actions on your website. Some of the other really interesting pieces of insight that analytics can provide is website usability and improvements. So are there any particular areas of your website that are causing users distress or frustrating them or leading them to leave the site? So we typically look at sort of exit rate or abandonment rate if we're talking about the cart process, because if a lot of people are failing to complete the cart after they've selected the product they want to purchase, that is a critical improvement that you need to make to increase your conversion rate and therefore your revenue via the website. A lot of people don't realize this, but analytics can also be used to look for critical errors or technical errors and other sort of shortfalls. Some really simple examples, looking for 404 errors. Most 404 pages have the title 404 in them. You can look at the titles of pages when people access them through the analytics interface, and you can see the frequency of 404s, where they're coming from, what kind of journeys they're interrupting, which can be incredibly useful. Now, the really critical stat and the really critical thing that everyone is really interested in, return on investment. And this is particularly easy and important to set up when you're using Google Ads. So we mentioned earlier that you can link Google Ads as an experience into the analytics interface, and it can pull the return on ad spend figures. And you can, from this, calculate your return on campaign investment. So what percentage back are you getting for what you're spending, which is ultimately the key question you have to be answering for all of this. This informs where you can allocate budget and many, many more sort of information. There's analytics captures sort of tens of thousands of different kind of elements in different ways, and the way that you can look at those is incredibly varied. So don't let your imagination limit what you can do in this. First, understand what you actually need to answer. Now, let's introduce Avinash. He's a particular favorite in our offices because of the wisdom and insight he brings to businesses in terms of tracking and this method of thinking. And this particular quote here is incredibly pertinent and useful for us. And this is the idea that the root cause of failure in most digital marketing campaigns is not the lack of creativity in the banner ad, the TV spot, or the sexiness of the website. It's not even often people involved. It sometimes can be. It quite simply is the lack of structured thinking about what real purpose of the campaign is, and the lack of an objective set of measures with which to identify success and failure. The real top level summary of that is, if you don't know what success looks like, it's very hard for you to report on that and actually to understand if what you're doing is working. So what we need to approach analytics data with is a mindset of, what do we need to track and measure in order to see this? And then Google Analytics can give us back that data far more easily. Now, the framework that we kind of look at, step one, is working out, well, what are the business objectives up front? The broadest parameters of this. It's going to be senior executives, product stakeholders, directors, C-suite. These are the people that you're going to need to make sure you've got that data from, and it's crystal clear. And it sounds really obvious, but a lot of marketing campaigns don't start with a clear set of objectives. They have a broad kind of goal, or there's some kind of shared agreement as to what success kind of looks like, but it's not expressed in numerical terms, which is ultimately the best way of doing this. When you know what the business objectives are, this is when you actually put those crisp goals onto each objective. What is the number? How are you going to measure it? From this, we go to writing down the key performance indicators, or KPIs. So if you know what the objectives are, the KPIs are, how are you going to track this? What metrics, what data is going to tell that story of success or not? And then step 4 is work out, well, what are these parameters for success? You've got your KPIs, you know what number you're tracking, or what's a good score or what's a bad score. Look to the organizational leaders, you look for marketing, you look for finance. These are kind of one of the areas you just need to break down the silos within your business to create that shared understanding of success. And then finally, we look at, okay, well, what are the segments? Who are the people? What are the behaviors? What are the outcomes that we want to analyze to understand, why we succeeded or failed? Which can be, stripped back and made even more simple of saying, well, look, step 1, objective, step 2, goal, step 3, KPIs, step 4, targets, step 5, segments, which really straightforward methods of kind of building your overall process. And if you start every campaign with that mindset, it will make going into analytics far more useful for you. And ultimately, you'll get a lot more practical insight. So when we talk about KPIs and when we talk about measuring success, there's a huge amount into what are good KPIs and what are bad KPIs. Actually, within these circles, it's sometimes a hotly contested area. Not that everyone on the stream would necessarily believe that. When we talk about good KPIs, we look at conversion rate. So what percentage of people on your website are undertaking the activity that you need, so a purchase or a contact. What's the economic or cash value of those people on the website? And then we can sort of extrapolate that. Well, what's the value per visitor on average? So if you acquire new visitors via a certain campaign source, what typically would we expect their value to be? That can help you prioritize where to go looking for your users. The next step, cost per acquisition, is a really interesting one. It's something that if we kind of park Google Analytics for a second and just look at a business and a marketing strategy as a whole, a lot of people don't know how much they're willing to pay for someone to complete the cart process or to get in touch. And this is a really critical question when you're weighing up your marketing budgets in total. And it can help you compare offline marketing like conventions or like paid advertising on TV or billboards with online advertising. If you know what your cost per acquisition is and you can actively report on that, you will know which ultimately is going to be your best channel. And then the big one is return on investment, because fundamentally that is the most important metric. I would argue if you're doing paid search and a lot of you're spending a lot of your ad spend to be seen, paid search is probably more important than revenue, because this kind of links directly into your profitability. Now, they're the good ones. Typically, they're not the only good ones, and they will be very much based on the campaign that you're running. But there are some bad ones which are relatively universal, with maybe a few notable exceptions. If you're reporting on clicks as one of your main KPIs, you are probably reporting the wrong thing and ultimately leading someone astray. Whether that's intentional or not, I don't know, but clicks can be bought cheaply and easily, and are seldom linked to success. So just bear that in mind. Bounce rate as a metric also is incredibly problematic, but when we talk about analytics and tracking, it's often one of those stats that people go, oh yes, I know what that means, but they often don't. They might know what bounce rate means, but they don't know what the implications of bounce rates are. For any of you on the stream that's unsure, bounce rate is when someone lands on the website, triggers Google Analytics, tracking code, it sends a signal. A bounce is when it sees no other signal after that point. So what often people expect is that someone views one page and leaves, but sadly it's a little more complex and nuanced than that, and it's an incredibly problematic way of viewing it. Most people typically look at bounce rate at a site level perspective. Now, if you have a blog and you have e-commerce category pages and you've got an FAQ section, your bounce rate will be different across all of those sections, and it will be different depending on the medium that you're sending people there by. So it just is meaningless. The question, what is a good bounce rate? I mean, you're going to get a shrug from most people. You can kind of have a bit of a stab, and there are a lot of industry statistics out there, but fundamentally your bounce rate is unique to you. And a better bounce rate is better than what you were a week ago, which often doesn't have the same weight and impact. And then similar to this, we could look at, say, video views or impressions of ads or other things. Basically, anything that we would class as a vanity metric, you know, that we can show volume of stuff, but again, aren't intrinsically linked to the business goals and values. There are some noteworthy exceptions if you are going for brand perception or just, you know, ubiquity. You're going to try and spread your message out far and wide. You want to know that you're getting volume and cut through, but still at some point along the way, you need to pair up metrics like clicks and video views with some more substantial ones. So just kind of bear that in mind. Now, the next model that we tend to pair this with is that of See, Think, Do, which you know, you might judge by the colors, is kind of linked with Google. And this kind of illustrates the journey that someone may be going through your website with. And what you will often find is what stage someone is at this process kind of impacts how you report on success for that user. So if we walk through this quickly, so the C stage is what we like to think is the largest possible audience for your product. That is anyone who could effectively buy your product. So the example here we've got from the fashion industry, which is people that wear clothes, which is a lot. Now, safe to say, not everyone that wear clothes will want to buy the ones that you're selling. So the ones that we need to start thinking about is the think stage, logically named, and that's anyone that could buy your product that's showing some intent of that, so commercial intent. So there's something around their search behavior, the content that they're looking at that suggests they're looking to buy. So these could be people wearing clothes, thinking that they might need some new ones. Really rather simple. Now, the real critical stage for most businesses, and this is where the vast majority of people spend all of their time talking to customers, is the do stage. So that's anyone that could buy your product, showing some, you know, direct commercial intent, but they need new ones now. They are about to make the purchase decision. They're weighing up the different alternatives. And then the care stage is once they've purchased, we'd say these are your existing customers. So typically those who have purchased more than once. And these are people who have bought clothes from you. Now, running through that process, it's fairly straightforward to see where different KPIs may be applicable. So at the C stage, that is where kind of clicks, impressions, views might show the general level of interest in the market. The think stage could be more engagement-based stats, so those people who are on your website that are viewing your content. The do stage is probably more attached directly to revenue, return on investment, and then care may be like customer lifetime value or the number of transactions they may undertake with you. So your metrics and your measurement need to obviously move and vary depending on your customers, but this just kind of model really helps structure your thinking, and actually from a marketing perspective helps you understand how to talk to them too. So kind of got a little bit detailed in there, but realistically this comes back to a very simple point, and this is the idea of testing it and measuring it, because you know, data and the right KPIs allow you to make changes, but you have to analyze to find the right answers, and this stops you from guessing. Every campaign needs to start somewhere, so you need to have a slightly, you know, kind of adventuring mindset, I guess, because you have to set your stake. But run short bursts, short sprints of data and work out what is working, what's not. Just have it in the mindset that you do need to test and iterate this process. Much the same with marketing automation, much the same with a lot of other marketing side of things. You've got to kind of move with the data and do what it suggests to you. So yeah, that was a fairly whistle-stop tour of analytics. And if I can kind of ask anyone from the stream to take one thing away, that's to make sure that A, it's installed, and B, you're tracking the goals that you need to. If you need any help with that or have any questions regarding that, drop it into the comments on the live stream, or of course, drop us a message afterwards and we will be happy to help. Which brings me on to the Q&A.
Brilliant. Yes. Thank you very much for that, Chris. Thank you, Amy, as well, though. Fantastic sessions, giving us a great insight into marketing automation and Google Analytics. A quick question. We've had a few come through on emails, but a quick question that I had for you, Chris, whilst we've still got you on video. You spoke about bounce rate being a bad metric.
Yeah.
It's something that a lot of people are interested in their bounce rate. Why is it quite often a bad metric? You gave us a bit of an idea, but it's not great, is it?
So no, it's not. I mean, besides my sort of short rant earlier, the the real reason why it's really bad, and I'm going to have to get a little technical here, is because of how it's measured and what it represents. So that tracking code that we saw at the beginning, that fires the information to Google where they process it. Now, bounce rate, when you see the first interaction, it sort of identifies you as a new user. This is a new session, start, and that's where kind of analytics starts to do its thing. Now, because of this session window or the visit window that they look at, if Google Analytics by default doesn't see anything within 30 minutes after that first interaction, they'll assume you've left, and then they'll close that window. However, that method of tracking does nothing to show people what do they do. How is that tied to insight or action on the page? So if they hit a web page, found the phone number, gave them a call, they might have got exactly what they wanted, but that will have been illustrated as a bounce and therefore ruled that user probably didn't achieve what they needed to, which is quite problematic. The other side is bounce rate is very poor at actually understanding how long someone has been sat on the website for. So when Google calculates how long someone's been on the page or on the website, it sort of counts the time between these tracking events that it sees. If you've bounced, Google can't ever see your second engagement. You might have been on that website for 28 minutes, which if you would, that's an exceptional length of time. But if it can't see that, it will report you as having bounced, and your time on site will be reported as nothing. So if there's ever any, you can make bounce rate easier or better, by better tracking different engagements on your website, which we would recommend doing, and that's when things do get tough. But out of the box, it's just thoroughly inadequate, and unfortunately, people make potentially disastrous marketing decisions based off what is a flawed metric.
Fascinating. Maybe bounce rate won't be quite such the thing going forwards. We have had a question through from Jess, actually. Chris, I think is probably one to come over to you. Jess is asking, is there a way of tracking clicks on a telephone number?
There is. So clicks on a telephone number is an interesting one. I think the easiest way of tracking it is make sure the link is clickable. So it's a tail link. So you often have to wrap it in an anchor tag. And then you can use, one or two things. You can either put an on-click event onto that link, which is a small piece of JavaScript, or if you're using Google Tag Manager, which is the way we tend to go into, you can actually use Tag Manager just to look for clicks on that link in particular. So any href, any anchor that contains tel, which is the prefix for a tel link, just register that as an event, and that as an event will be captured in Google Analytics. Not the best method of working out actually how many people phone you, because you can of course click on a phone number and then not connect the call, which I do all the time because I have fat fingers and I click on the wrong things. So if you are really interested to see how calls relate to actual contacts into your business, you've got two options really, as I see it. You can go down the call tracking route and use dynamic call tracking. So there are a handful of third-party tool providers out there. What they do is they generate a phone number that's unique to you whenever you land, and that the information that's generated when you phone that number gets passed back to Google Analytics. So Analytics actually tracks the call. You can track the call's duration and which campaign they've come from, which is really powerful. There is an overhead or a cost to that, so you've got to make the business case there. But if you're just using Google Ads, for example, and you don't want an additional paid for system, Google Ads has call tracking now, which is incredibly useful. So again, anyone that calls those numbers will be recorded as a goal effectively within the ads interface, which just helps connect, is my campaign actually working?
Fantastic. Amy, a couple of questions in for you, looking at the world of marketing automation. So,
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, of course. Sorry, I think we might have just that for a second. So we've got a couple of questions. One of them on email beforehand, looking at how automation and analytics link together, and the question over from Derek, looking at the best Salesforce type automation apps to integrate to, looking at things like Salesforce and Zoho. So we're looking at a few things around the world of integration with our marketing automation.
Okay, great. Yeah, good questions. So the main thing, I suppose, with connecting the automation with the analytics is exactly what Chris said, which is that campaign level tracking. So usually what you find if you're sending out emails as part of the automation is that UTMs, which is Google's way of tracking certain elements within the campaign, will be passed back into Google Analytics. The best part about it is that as a user, you don't need to do anything. Once they're set up inside your ESP, for example, that will just append to Google's kind of way of resolving those links. So they tend to track things like the campaign, the source, the medium, even right down to the specific link that has been tracked. So then if you go into your analytics, you'd see on a campaign level exactly what those website visitors have done after they've clicked on an email. So you get that full view ranging from the ESP giving you the open and click-through rate all the way through to the actual engagement on the site inside analytics. So that's how I would connect the two together. Like I say, usually you don't need to do anything, which is even better. And then connecting to things like Salesforce, I suppose it depends what you define as the best tool for the job. Best can mean different things to different people, whether it's usability, it's cheap, they get support, you get training, they're UK based. I suppose it depends on what you want to do with the information. If you want to connect to your CRM, the fundamentals, I suppose, are making sure that the data comes in and out easily, which you can definitely do through Zapier. I think you could even do it as a base level. But if you then want to become more advanced, you might need a company to help you, or a support team, or even developers to help you get what you need from those platforms. So I would say, think about how you're defining best for your business.
Being the data very much being the key element to kind of everything that we've looked at today, and great ways of doing the integration. Another question that we've had through for you, Amy, is looking about having automation set up. So we've had an email over saying, don't have any automation set up at the moment, but think it could be useful, can see the benefits of doing it. I'm sure going through everything that we've had in this session so far today is going to absolutely have reassured and reinforced that. So how do you go about actually getting your marketing automation? How do you go about starting? Or microphone there. There we go.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Shall I start again?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah, so I would say go back to being old school and get it up on a whiteboard and plot your customer funnel. So think about how the customer becomes a prospect and where they've come from, through to being aware of your business, through to converting, through to then becoming an advocate, and plot where in that funnel you can add communications via automation. So one of the most easiest ones is that welcome email. So think about, how does someone become a prospect? How can you automate that welcome? And then all the way through the funnel to the other end is, how do you turn your customer into an advocate, and where could you slot automation in? So it's kind of going all the way back to basics and thinking of your customer funnel and how you can help customers through that.
Amazing. Thank you very much for that, Amy. love the idea of going back to a whiteboard. I think that's
Oh, you
brilliant.
got that wrong. Or a flip
A
chart.
couple of questions through for you as well via email. Just a couple of very quick ones here.
Cool.
We've had something through from someone who's struggling to get their developers to install the right levels of tracking.
Yes, okay.
It sounds like you might have had some experience with that one before.
Once or
What
twice.
should they do?
Okay, so there are a couple of scenarios where this is fairly easy to navigate, and there's some tough ones. If you're, as I mentioned briefly earlier, if you're running off a more recognizable kind of platform, whether it's a commercial one or an open source one, there should be solutions for you to install extensions or plugins or various assistive elements that can help that. And the question there is simply just, are your developers enabling you to do that? Now, I can't think of a logical reason why not. If they cannot implement the code from a development perspective and they won't let you install the code via a plugin, then you probably have a slightly larger issue than just a tracking one, which I know isn't an awful lot of help. But I would say that certainly look to how you can work with them to get that code installed. If you are a bit more intrepid and you control and run the website, you can always try and do it yourself. However, there's a big health warning around. Make sure you know what you're doing, because it kind of gets into slightly skilled territory here. One of the things we have done, though, to reduce the level of development input that is needed with Google Analytics is deploying it via what's called Google's Tag Manager. Now, we haven't spoke about Google Tag Manager really at all today, just because that is another beast entirely. But Tag Manager works on the principle that you install Tag Manager's code, and then you kind of treat Tag Manager like a bucket. And into that bucket, you put all of your other tracking. So you put Google Analytics, you put any kind of tracking any of your additional platforms need, your call tracking, user experience software, all of that stuff can be dropped into Tag Manager with zero development support. And the real key point that Tag Manager can enable is the event tracking and tracking conversions on your website. Without Tag Manager, these do take development input, because quite often you need to use on-click events or other kinds of JavaScript and code to effectively tell analytics what an event is. Whereas Tag Manager, you do it through Google's Tag Manager interface, and there are various ways of indicating, if someone does this action, then send an event to Google, for example. And you can do lots of other really useful things as well. So if you are really struggling and your developer has quite a long pipeline, or they take a long time to implement things, try and get Google Analytics on there, Google Tag Manager on there, because then the upside is you can say, well, once you've done that, I shan't be bothering you for tracking anymore. And that's usually part of the negotiation I go through on that.
Sounds like we've got some options. Brilliant. And one final quick one then, Chris. Someone has been in touch who does not have an e-commerce store. Can Google Analytics still give them a figure for return on investment?
Ooh, now that's the golden one, the golden question, really, because e-commerce, running an e-commerce business is tough in many ways, but actually working out return on investment via online is generally quite easy, because it's very easy to work out the money that goes through the website. Now, if you are an offline business, or you do your sales offline and you use online to maybe kind of generate leads, that can be a greater challenge, simply because Google Analytics won't know what's sold, or it won't know the value unless you tell it. And this is a fairly universal thing across all businesses, really, is recording business, recording where it comes from, and then making sure that data is sort of circulated is often one of the weak points, because people are busy and systems are complicated and often not connected very well. So if you are a lead gen business and you don't run e-commerce, the way that we typically do it is we ask someone, say, well, look at the last full year. So look at how many people have contacted you via the website, and then what the business you think you've written off the back of those is. So how many of those contacts are sort of leads that turn into sales, and then what are those sales worth? If you know what that is, you can then work out, well, you work backwards. So you say, for example, if 1 in 10 leads or forms that come through your website are genuine leads, then you have a 10% offline conversion, which then you can work back from, well, 10% of the average revenue that a customer is worth. That means that each contact form fill can be set to have a value, and this value can be put into the back of analytics. I hasten to add, it's not a real value, it's a fictional value, or it's a value based on previous data, but it's indicative. So, you know, it can give you some confidence that the right kinds of people coming through your website should be worth a certain figure. And you can use that to kind of calculate your ongoing return on investment. So what is your current investment into marketing, and then what should the website be generating? But if you've got a business that takes a long time for a lead to turn into business and for you to actually get paid, sometimes you're going to have to calculate return on investment, you know, at the end of a quarter or a 6-month period or the end of the year, and you're going to have to look back across that. Which is a greater challenge, and really to get the best benefit from that is, I can't stress enough the importance of, even if you have an Excel spreadsheet or a piece of paper that you write your sales on, write where they came from as best you can. And to actually have that information, you need to make sure you ask people that. So I'd start at that, and then once you know that you're tracking the source better and you're actually recording your sales better, I'd then start to worry about, okay, how do we get that into the analytics interface? The symptom of a business not being able to see what the return on investment is often not analytics' problem. It's a business process problem, which is a much harder thing to solve.
Fantastic. Well, that's all the questions that we've had come through. So thank you very much for those detailed answers and for the whole presentation. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Chris. It's been absolutely fantastic, and a lot that we have learned over the course of this morning. And thank you as well for joining us. Contact details are on the screen. So if you have any questions off the back of this, because there is quite a lot to take in through the course of a 1-hour webinar. So if you do have any questions that come to you at a later point, then please feel free to reach out to Footprint Digital and to Wired Plus. More than happy to answer questions at any time. And this webinar will be available here on YouTube for you to come back and look at whenever you need. So the data is always there. This has been a joint webinar from Footprint Digital and Wired Plus. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you soon.